unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J. Andy Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm your host, of course, Dr. J, and today we have a super duper special show for you today. 3, that's right, 1, 2, 3 guests. The first one being astronaut Edgar Mitchell. That's right, 6th man on the moon. Second being Shannon Panzo, who will tell you how you could bring your mind and your conscious and subconscious together. And then last but not least, former presidential candidate Michael Dukakis. This will be a very different type of show today, and I would want you all to enjoy it. Sadly, there are no calls tonight. Also, don't forget, we still have Contact in the Desert tickets giving away. So today, we are going to announce yet another winner. And that winner is Ivy West, Honolulu, Hawaii. Ivy West, I will send you an email and you can claim your ticket. Anybody out there, contactinthedesert.com/DRJ. Again, contactinthedesert.com/Dr. J. There you can sign up to win one of 8 more tickets. That's right, we've had 2 winners, 8 more to go, and they will be all posted, the names on the website, of course, unless you receive an email from me say you'd rather have your initial. Maybe I'll do first name and initial. Point being, drjradiolive.com, you could see them, and of course, the contest goes till May 15th for Contact in the Desert. And now, let's get ready for our first guest, the one and only 6th man on the moon, Apollo 14 astronaut, Dr. Edgar Mitchell.
Thank you very much.
China, in the last few months, as you know, has landed a probe on the moon. What do you think what's the implications of them getting there before us going back to the moon, since we have in the early 70s?
Well, I don't find any implications at all. That's the way technology spreads from country to country, from group to group, and it's a normal thing.
Do you know why we stopped going to the moon? I know the expenses were high, but some other people say that maybe there was other bases on there, maybe Russians. Other people say there was extraterrestrials that warned us off. It's all muttered in conspiracy, but I wanted to get a direct answer from someone who's been there.
I don't know that any of those are true. However, there's a possibility that there are alien bases or some bases on the backside of the moon that we're not aware of. There seem to be some photographs there that are telling, but I don't know that anybody really knows what they are. But all of this is just technology and progress spreading from group to group as they as their political system and their monetary system allows them to do so.
I'm glad you brought up the bases on the moon. We've spoken to a few people who assume that, and as a matter of fact, one of your fellow astronauts appeared in a science fiction movie, but he played a rather serious role. It was Buzz Aldrin, and in the movie he played, the Transformers movies, he played himself, and he went to a secret base in somewhere in the United States. It wasn't Nevada, it wasn't Area 51, and he basically explained to them the reason why we didn't go back, because we encountered these bad ETs that warned us. Now again, this was science fiction, but some people take this as a way to acclimate the public as to what really was happening there. Now obviously I don't think he went to the backside, but do you support Buzz Aldrin speaking more openly on subjects like this now?
No, I'm sorry. Please don't quote me on this, but I simply do not respect Buzz's position on many of these things.
No problem at all. Absolutely no problem. Okay, now, when you were on your way home from the moon, on the way back to Earth, something spiritual happened to you that got you on a spiritual path. What exactly happened? Do you mind telling everybody?
Okay, sure. It's just seeing the larger picture, having a perspective that's overwhelmingly powerful, like the mountaintop experience, or the big picture effect, that's been going on throughout history. We have many records of it, and that's what happened to many of us. We call it the big picture effect, or the overview effect, and we find traces of it in various cultures throughout ancient history. In Sanskrit, it's called samadhi. In Greek, it's called metanoia. In the Buddhist tradition, it's satori. And it's experiencing things, being overwhelmed and experiencing things in a way that makes you see them in a larger perspective.
I could imagine just seeing, I remember in a previous interview you said when you were on the moon, you seeing the Earth in the moon's position where it would have been had you been on the moon. Just what an experience that would be. And then being on the ship coming back to the Earth, just seeing all the stars and the planets, I could just imagine what that would do to someone versus someone just looking through a telescope on the ground. Now, you took it one step further and you found an organization to pursue a different kind of science. Is that correct?
Well, let's just say that this is a phenomenon that we've observed throughout history in people that have a powerful new experience and are overwhelmed by it, and it has a name, and in these different cultures it has a name, and that's nothing new here. That once we understand what's happening, that's what happened.
Can you tell the listeners and me in general, although I know a little bit, but on the record, about Noetic Sciences and about your organization?
Sure. Let's start back that for over 400 years, since the beginning of science, with let's go back to René Descartes in the 1500s, when he made the statement that body, mind, physicality, spirituality were different realms of reality that didn't interact. Now, what happened with that is it served a noble purpose at the time. It got the Spanish Inquisition off the backs of the intellectuals who were burning them at the stake for disagreeing with the church. And so that solved that problem. But for 400 years after that, consciousness and mind were not proper subject for science as science arose after Kepler and Newton and the greats of that period. And it's only when at the end of the 19th century, when Einstein and
Rosen.
I'm thinking of another one of the greats at that period. I'm blocking on his name right now.
Tesla?
Tesla? No, I'm talking about... that'll come to me in just a second. Anyhow, they were setting the ground for quantum mechanics to arise, and by the 1920s, we had what we now call quantum mechanics as a very, very important part of our science, and we know that much of our at the bottom of it, awareness at a molecular level, and as we get up into complexities, into animal species and more into animal species, we call that consciousness. And so instead of, as was initially thought, the universe is made of matter and energy, we now have to say it's matter, energy, and awareness, which includes consciousness. And that's quite different than 100 years ago. So, go ahead.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because a lot of scientists, specifically at SETI, they try to separate science from spirituality, but you can't. Really, consciousness ties in with everything, and I think that's what's prevented us humans from taking that greater leap. Now, in the last 20, 30 years, more researchers and more scientists are starting to realize the impact of consciousness, and I'm really glad that you picked up on it before all of them. What what's the goal of Noetic Sciences, your organization? To teach people about consciousness?
I'm sorry, I should re-ask your question, please.
What's the goal of your foundation?
Oh, well, it was just to bring consciousness into the awareness that it has not had, and and to make it a part of our understanding. And I think my Noetic Foundation has done that quite nicely, and it's still happening. That we're now, and as far as I think the number is about 60 universities and physics departments around the world that have actively been pursuing consciousness and mind stuff in their academic work.
One great thing that I participated in, which I know you did 20-some years ago when it changed its name, it was in Australia, maybe New Zealand. At the time, I think it might have been called subliminal messaging, photographic memory. Now they call this offshoot. It was Richard Welch was the person who founded this photographic memory sort of ideal, and it's called Zox Pro now. You participated in that. They use you as a spokesman now, as your name saying. Even Dr. Mitchell quoted, quote, "I've realized that we only use such a small portion of our brain," which all scientists know this. If we can expand to use 100% of our brain or more than half of it, do you think we could achieve the things that Zox teaches us, such as literally remembering everything in our subconscious, everything we look and photograph, and even getting to the point of telepathy?
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand where you're going with your question here.
Do you think if we're able to expand to use our brain more so than what we're using now, that we could stop linear thinking and start going into areas such as photographic memory and maybe even telepathy?
Of course. We can expand our capabilities. We are still very incomplete in our understanding in cosmology, our understanding of how our universe began and all of the capabilities in it. And that will go on should go on for quite some time.
I truly respect your foundation, and that's why I'm definitely going to be plugging it in. The link's going to be placed below for everybody to see. It's Noetic Sciences, noetic.org, if I'm not mistaken, is the exact website, but again, I'll place it. I'm going to go back a minute to space. Did you believe that there was extraterrestrial life prior to you being assigned to Apollo 14?
I had not all the evidence before Apollo 14, although I grew up in Roswell, New Mexico, and where that big event took place in 1947. But I had not studied all of the evidence until after my space mission, and then I started studying it as it became more known and more popular. I started doing more study in that area, and there's not any question in my mind we've been visited, and the visitors have been coming for quite some time.
Dr. Mitchell, when you said you were in high school in a previous time in Roswell during this event, but obviously it was such an isolated incident in the sense that the military kept it from the public. But when you returned as a hero, hometown hero, for what you've done for your country and the world and for humankind, people started opening up to you and telling you what happened in Roswell. Isn't that the case?
Well, yes, the people in the Roswell incident who were directly involved or who were descendants of those directly involved, they wanted to tell me about their story, and I listened very carefully to all of that.
A couple other questions, and then obviously we'll end it for today. What would you like to see happen with the future of space travel and with what's happening on the moon? Would you like there to see our colonizing Mars and the moon and going and beyond? I mean, obviously everybody would like that, but do you see that as a viable thing that we can happen in the next few decades?
I think like everything else, we must continue to develop our understanding, and we will develop technologies associated with it. As I pointed out, we really didn't start to understand awareness and consciousness until we invented quantum mechanics at the end of the 19th and end of the 20th century, which showed us that that our, we call it the sixth sense, it should be our intuition, is really fundamental. It's a fundamental aspect of the way life is put together. And it's only now that we're really coming to terms with all of that.
I'm glad you brought that up again, because I could just imagine in 100 years from now reading textbooks where there's not five senses. The sixth sense is just, it's there. And like you said, it'll be among the first. Intuition will be before touch, smell, feel. And I really like that, because that just shows that we are not only understanding what we are, we're understanding the universe, nature, everything else. Now let me ask you a couple final questions about what's going on Earth right now. As you know, we have climatic changes. We have wars going on. We have the war on terror. If I know you were an astronaut, I know you are a scientist, I know you're studying consciousness, but if you had the ability to influence the president on making any of these changes, what would you do if you were president?
Well, I think we'll just have to continue to do the developing. We want a society that I'd like to see our society get rid of war and killing altogether, using war technologies as a way of getting our way, when indeed we should be doing it as a matter of understanding and wanting to understand the civilization that we're in, and to make it a more benign and civil lifestyle. And we have a long ways to go. We're still quite eager and caught up in using war techniques and to get our way. And that has to be something that hopefully will go away in this century, if not. And the fact is, at the moment, we are not on a sustainable path. We're going to have to learn to do better than we've been doing, or we're going to do ourselves in.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Mitchell, and I'll look forward to speaking to you again.
All right.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye. What an amazing interview with Edgar Mitchell. Sorry for the quality, folks. That's the best we can do with him. He is 86 years young, going on 87, but we got to hand it to him for being such an amazing person, for opening up his subconscious and conscious, actually out there trying to lead disclosure, and being one of the only astronauts talking about some of the what other people would deem conspiracies. So for that matter, everybody, astronaut Edgar Mitchell. This is perfect, because now we're about to segue into the next interview, which actually ties into what we were talking about. We're going to be talking about how to merge your conscious and subconscious, and why it is so important, and what you can unlock, what abilities you can unlock by doing so. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring on our next guest, and he's the founder of Zox Pro. And without further ado, I'm going to let him explain to you what that is, by the way. And without further ado, let's go ahead and bring him on, Mr. Shannon Panzo. Shannon, welcome to the show.
Well, hi there, Dr. J. Thank you for having me on the show today. I'm sure that we'll create some interest and intrigue for your clientele out there.
Absolutely. I think what you're doing and what you're teaching out there is extremely important. Now, before we go, I guess maybe we can define Zox Pro a little later. Let's just go to the basic reason of why I invited you to be in particular with this interview right after Edgar Mitchell. And that is integrating your conscious and your subconscious memory. What are the benefits of bridging the two consciousnesses?
Well, whenever you bridge the conscious mind with the subconscious mind, it gives you a great avenue to do anything that you want to better, easier, faster, and just makes life a lot easier overall. And the reason why this is because quite often our conscious mind and our subconscious mind are not in agreement with each other. And this causes a conundrum within yourself. And this is almost the same as lying to yourself. That is going to create undue stress, and ultimately things like that can literally lead to disease, which again, we're going down a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but the point is there's a lot of different things that can happen if you do not actually have your conscious mind working alongside your subconscious mind and integrating the two of them together for a common goal.
Is everybody out there that's listening to this capable of doing this, or is it just certain people such as Leonardo da Vinci or Nikola Tesla, or those people, the visionaries who were thinking outside the box and contributed to mankind in such ways that other people sort of can't?
Well, I think a lot of the times we're led to believe that we have to be special, that we have to have superhuman powers in order to achieve such things. And it's actually a complete falsehood. No, we don't have to be superhuman. No, we don't have to be something special. Everyone can actually do these things. Primarily, it starts with meditation. Whenever you want to talk with your subconscious, which typically during your average day is not, even though it's sitting in the background doing all of its functions and doing all of the little quirkisms that control you and how you act in certain circumstances, even though it's doing all those things, we're not necessarily in control of it or in contact with it at that point. And that's when our conscious mind is actually driving the car, if you will. And we go along and we decide, okay, we want to make contact with our subconscious. We want to start controlling our own life and our own destiny through our subconscious. So what do? Meditation. That is the first and easiest way to get involved in dealing with your subconscious. And there's a lot of different forms of meditation out there. Basically, they all involve some form of relaxation, a relaxed state of mind, so that you have easier access to your subconscious. And then from accessing your subconscious, you can then go about doing some incredible things in your life. You can actually start programming your life and creating the good things to happen to you in your life. And all at the same time that you're doing this, you're being very expedient and very efficient at actually accomplishing things in your life. Now the first step, now wait for it, guys. Here we go. The first step that you should take if you really want to get down and dirty with the subconscious, stop watching all that TV. That TV is very destructive. See, TV, what happens there is you're living your life through somebody else's eyes. And unfortunately, some of the shows that are demonstrated on TV are not in your best interest. If you are the type of person that likes to watch, let's say, police shows, well, there's a lot of negative things that happen in those police shows. Do you want negativity of that nature showing up in your life? Well, the TV hypnotizes you. And likewise, you're going to have a lot of those types of things rolling over into your life, those dramas rolling over into your life and recreating themselves in your life because you're being hypnotized by the TV, then you're watching the police shows and all these encounters. And by the way, another thing that does, it makes things that are not okay, they make them seem okay to have happen around you. It kind of glosses over what it's really all about. So the point is we don't want you to be saturated by that. We want you to have really good information coming through. So turn off the TV, or at least be wise about what content you're actually watching on TV. Remember, most of all TV has already been censored to agendas that you actually generally know nothing about. So that's another reason why you should not be watching TV if you're trying to get in tune with your subconscious. If you're one of the masses and you enjoy TV and you're not going to change your ways, then you're not going to change your ways. Then you will have to deal with it accordingly.
It sounds to me that the reason why TV, your brain, when you're watching it, is you're using such a small portion of it. And I gather that the mainstream media obviously wants us to continue to watch TV. It seems to me like they almost want to dumb us down on purpose. Do you get that idea?
Well, the dumbing down is done in many different ways. But for instance, if the TV is giving you a lot of conflicting ideas and conflicting ways of life, and it is not a steady state or a steady stream of information which is conducive to your particular lifestyle, then it actually starts creating questions within yourself. Now, the more confused you are about things in general, then it's harder to make decisions. And organizations like the government, which is part of the dumbing down circumstance, if they don't want to have you be a smart person in regards of how you act and think, then TV is a great avenue to confuse you and create all kind of realities in there in your own mind that simply shouldn't be in there, shouldn't be existing in your own mind. You have one life to live. Live it. And the first thing that you should do every morning, instead of throwing on the news channel, is do a meditation. Why? Because that sets up the rest of your day. That's actually so much more important than anything that's on TV. You can have a hurricane blowing out the window. It's actually more important to get your mind in check first. Then, amazingly, you can deal with that hurricane. If you're assaulted with all these other outside agendas and electronic interference and a number of other things, then likely you're going to lead your day, going through the day, confused. Sure, it's nice to catch up on the news, but that's somebody else's news. That isn't necessarily your news unless you're the person in the middle of the drama.
When you were talking about programming yourself to have the good things that you want in life, a lot of people refer this as manifesting. Is that what you're talking about?
Once you undertake programming in your own subconscious, you can direct your life and you can direct what enters into your life. It's already pre-programmed as to what you have available to you. And amazingly, most people will never, ever be able to fill their cup full of what the universe has to offer them, simply because they're not asking. Through the use of meditation and through the use of programming, you can then ask the universe to provide for you all the things that it's meant to provide for you. And it will. And it'll actually do it at the right time. It'll provide things when you're supposed to have them there. Now, some people have had experiences where they go in, they program something that they think is the answer to all their circumstances. But maybe they programmed it ahead of doing a few things that they needed to do first. Well, they end up getting exactly what they programmed in for, but then they find out, gee, I wasn't quite ready for that. Oh, that's a bit too big for me. So now they have to say, well, gee, I guess I really don't want that because I need to do these other things first. And so this is one of the trappings with the programming. But once you come to terms and understand what the programming is all about, yes, you can manifest a tremendous amount of things. Now, a key thing is having the avenue to exercise your brain in a superior way. Now, that's where our training comes in, because that's part of what we actually undertake. See, whenever whenever you're dealing with life in general, most people move through life making so many smallish decisions that they're surrounded by this cloud, this mazma of indecision. Now, this indecision, because we're forced to make so many large and big decisions every day, it actually can lead to things like depression. Because you finally get to the point where you can make no decision, and that's pretty much where depression leads you. So it's important that you take the opportunity to get real with yourself, get real with your subconscious, start manifesting things in the right way for yourself, take control of your life. And this is the first basic step in taking control of your life. Again, when it comes to exercising your brain, I am sure that you've heard of crossword puzzles, and you've heard of different
Sudoku.
types of Sudoku and little math games like that. And there's a whole heap of games that you can play with yourself. But what it's been found is that those things do not actually build your brain. What you have to do is you have to encourage what is called neuroplasticity to take place. Now, there's a function of neuroplasticity, which basically says this: if you stress your brain to the point where it must grow, it does. So what that means is if you overtax, whenever you take your brain and you overtax it to a certain threshold, and then you force your brain to think further than that threshold exists, you cause your brain to produce more. You produce more brain cells. You produce more dendrites, which are your memory storage compartments. You produce more neurons. You produce the highways of information flow, this superhighway of information flow. Now, just to bring this topic in a little bit, mental photography typically starts for people at around 25,000 to 50,000 words per minute. Now, our brain loves that because it takes that information and goes gobble, 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 gobble. It loves it. It eats it all up. And it's given to the brain at a rate that is consistently stressing the brain past that threshold to the point where you are actually stimulating the brain to grow. Now, whenever you do this, a natural byproduct of this is your decision-making becomes much more clear because the mazma that I was talking about earlier, that cloud, that fog that you walk through every day, it dissipates, it lifts. So whenever you're making your decisions, they become quicker, cleaner, clearer. It's easy. And whenever your decisions become easy, your life becomes easy.
One major thing that other people that we've recently talked about, it seems to me a lot of people are recognizing consciousness. Even Foster Gamble, the heir to the Procter and Gamble empire, recently spoke about a very similar situation where he was trying to understand the universe and he kept meditating and asking for it to solve a certain dilemma he had, and essentially it came through. And then, of course, we had another recent interview who wrote a book on multidimensional traveler where she basically, using meditation and bridging her conscious and subconscious, she too was able to have questions answered by tapping into the universal consciousness. And of course, she talked about some other abilities. Once you unlock this ability and erase this cloud, are you able to have other effects such as psychic abilities?
You are not limited in any way. See, I'm going to give you a simple mathematical equation, and this will require you interacting with me for a moment. If you take a fractional number, say 3%, that's 3 over 100. Okay, that's 3%. And that's typically what a person will deal with their brain power throughout their entire life, is around 3%. Now, we have 97% remaining, which we really don't tap into that much. Now, we use all the regions of our brain. We're just not using the brain power we were born with. So whenever we're looking at that, we go, okay, well, what is 100 over 100? That equals what?
100%. 1.
It equals 1, okay? 1 is your first whole number. Now, there is a reason why I'm saying that, because we're all striving. Every last person on this earth is all striving to reach wholeness. We're all striving to reach 1. Okay? So if we're all striving to reach 1, and it's so far away, well, we have that much room we can be growing. So, yes, you as an ordinary person have a tremendous ability to grow within yourself. It's just locked away. All you have to do is tap into it. How do you tap into it? You tap into it through your subconscious. Use your subconscious as your guiding tool. And yes, integration of your conscious and your subconscious, when you first start doing these things, it's going to feel weird, because you're not used to dealing with your subconscious and the things that are locked away in there. But you are not limited in any way. And the more we research this, the more we find that the holographic universe is very real and functional. And we literally are recreating that daily all around us. What we need to do is we need to take control of things and recreate those things in the right way. And that's what manifestation is all about. Bringing in the right things into our life, bringing in the good things. And again, it goes back to the very mundane existence of decision making. The better your decisions, the better your life will be. The more great information that you have to base your decisions on means you're going to have fantastic results with your decision making. And that's going to lead to a better life again.
Another major point that we talked about off air is that a learning curve. It is essentially skyrocketing from the moment of birth, and then the moment we hit, say, preschool or kindergarten, age 4 or 5, we start slowing down. So our learning curve, rather than going up through grade school, high school, college, and beyond, is not necessarily what we should be having. Can you explain to the listeners why that is? Why our learning curve actually starts to go down when we hit school?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. Let me take you back a little bit further than what I normally would, because of the topic today. When we are born, our conscious and subconscious are the same thing. It's whenever we start taking on a different paradigm, that's whenever the schism happens and we start not being our subconscious. We start being the conscious mind. And that's what we deal with daily. And the subconscious kind of gets buried and stuck in the corner somewhere. And really our subconscious is the great mover. But whenever you, and about the age of 5, we take on a whole new paradigm. It's called reading. And we actually have to be taught to read. See, we have a fully working photographic eidetic memory when we're born. And this is how we learn so much. And because the two hemispheres of our brain are integrated, our subconscious and our conscious mind are integrated, everything is working as it actually should. At that point there, we are actually at the 100% mark. But as we get older, that depreciates. And sure, there's physical degradation of certain neural pathways and what have you, things that are unused get set aside. That's fine. But that does not excuse the fact that we can do so much more. So whenever we first learn to read, what happens is we're basically instructed to put away our most valuable asset. We're told to disregard our most valuable asset, and that is called the photographic memory. And the photographic memory still exists because we're born with it, and we've just lost touch with it. So what our organization does is we teach people how to reassociate themselves with the photographic memory and then how to use it throughout your life. Now, the easiest way to do that, obviously, is through gaining a tremendous amount of information. And this is where the mental photography comes in. The mental photography allows you to assimilate information at 25,000, 50,000, 100,000, millions, literally millions of words per minute. So yes, you can do all these things. Whenever we were first doing the testing back around 1975, they pulled up this machine called a tachistoscope. Now, the tachistoscope is in psychological departments, typically in the universities, and what they do is they flash information at subliminal speeds. And these are speeds that are flashing full pages of information, 40 milliseconds or even faster. And then you get to take a test on what you didn't see. You didn't consciously see it, because the conscious mind doesn't even register that even as a flash at those speeds. So what was happening is you can actually take tests on this information, and you can see how well you're scoring on a subliminal basis. Well, our people that had gone through and learned mental photography, they were able to go through the testing and score easily 85 and 90%, whereas the people that had not experienced mental photography using the same machine, well, they didn't do too well. They did, as what you would consider strictly a guessing ratio, and that's pretty much what they attained. So there was a very significant difference between the people that had experienced our process and learned it the correct way and then utilized it through this method of testing. Now, we don't need a stethoscope today to tell us that we know what is happening, because people all over the world are doing this for themselves. And, okay, we were talking about psychic abilities, okay? If you're a fireman, wouldn't you like to know what's on the other side of the door?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I think a movie Backdraft had a really good suggestion there. If you're familiar at all with that movie, well, yes, you do want to know what's on the other side of the door. Well, your intuition and your psychic abilities are enhanced whenever you increase the abilities of your brain. And so it can be what's on the other side of the door. It can be who's calling you on the phone. It can be what's around the next corner. There are so many different ways to view psychic abilities. It really depends upon the person as to how they are going to have it manifest within their life. Most people tend to go towards one thing or another with their psychic abilities. So it really depends on the person. Now, with the ZoxPro training, we get very, very basic. We give you the very specifics in order to have results with the mental photography and with programming and how you can work those things to make a better life for yourself. Now, what we do allow you to do, see, the ZoxPro training is actually a fully working system. But what we do is then we give you the creative license to create your own life, how you choose to create it. We're not going to tell you how to do it. We're going to let you guide yourself and use your own imagination how you want to move your life in what ways, and then you use the mechanism of the training itself to support your ends. So once you learn ZoxPro training, then let's say you want to become an engineer. Well, if you want to become an engineer, you would be photographing all kind of books on engineering skills and mathematical skills and things of this nature to amplify your ability to deal with the engineering skills that you're looking for. And then you would also be using your programming to support your ends as well. Now, yes, this is great for school because when people are going to school and college and such, they get the mental photography and they use it for their courses. And instead of them, see, whenever you go to college or you go to university, what happens is you're supposed to be spending no less than 3 to 4 hours of study for every hour of classroom time. So you can easily, quickly turn a college or university experience into absolute drudgery of living in the library, doing nothing but study. Or you can learn this stuff at a phenomenal rate. And by the way, the mental photography, it has 100% retention for life. So all you have to do is mentally photograph your books a few times to get it all. And instead of you taking eons to read books, you might take 10 or 20 minutes to entirely absorb a book that is going to give you everything that you need for that particular course. And then it's just a matter of you showing up for the test, really. We have people that may study 10 minutes a week, in some cases 10 minutes a month for the full course load that they're taking. Now, granted, that's after you become proficient. But, yes, we have people that do that. And there's many other instances of how people have used this just in wonderful ways. But, okay, you had a question.
Absolutely. I have two, actually. One, I'm going to ask them both at the same time because we've got a little under 10 minutes left before break. You mentioned Zox Pro, so I'm going to ask you if you could describe to everybody what is Zoxing. And before you do that, I want to ask you personally, how did you unlock these abilities yourself?
Well, I took the training. I actually took a seminar, and it's called Brain Management. It was given back in I took this originally back in 1986, or maybe 85, but it was about that time. I became an instructor in 1986, though. But in 1985, we'll just say it was 1985. It's probably the end of 1985. In 1985, I took the training for the first time. And during that training, I took it with Richard Welch. He's the founder. He's the father of mental photography. And I took the training, and I found that it had absolutely phenomenal ability. I took the training, turned around. I was given the opportunity to take a test. And this test, I wasn't even qualified to be in the room with everybody else. But they let me in. They let me in to take this test, kind of chuckling under their breath. And so I went in. I had prior to taking the test, I had gone down to the local library, and why they even I must be a really honest guy, because they let me take out about 30 reference books, which reference books never leave the library. They let me take these out, and I over the next 3 days, I did nothing but eat, drink, and sleep the mental photography of what I was doing. And to make a long story short, after doing that for many hours a day and doing the relaxation meditative sessions during that time, what I wound up doing is I wound up walking into this executive level test. And when I walked in there, I looked around, and most of the people were in suit coats. I showed up in jeans. I was feeling a little bit out of place. Anyhow, I go in, and I go in and take this test. Okay, everything's done. And I go to walk out, and the guy says, "Are you sure you're done?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Why don't you go check your answers again?" So I go back to my seat, look around the room, and everybody's still there. I'm going, oh, okay, I get it. So finally, a couple people leave before me, so I take it up and I hand it in. I didn't change anything. I just handed it in. And then I wait for the test results. Then I get this strange call. And there's a part of the test dealing with logical thinking. And they said, have you ever seen a test like this, this side of the test before? No. Have you ever taken a test like this before? No. Okay. You sure? You didn't cheat? No. Okay. Well, it was the first time that they'd ever seen a score like that come off of one of these logical thinking tests. A first-timer that had never taken a test like that, and basically I kind of blew it out of the water. But anyhow, the point is yes, I found that it was extremely valuable right away, and that we could do just incredible things with our brain if we allow it to manifest. So the mental photography is only the first step in what then becomes a whole process of things that you can do for yourself. The mental photography is great for information. But on brain building, it is a phenomenal brain exercise, and it does what I was talking about earlier. It stimulates the neuroplasticity to come in and actually build your brain even further than what you had before. It is excellent for anybody doing anything, whether you're a bricklayer or whether you are an astronaut. You can use these things for your own well-being and your own gain. And yes, you can be the ordinary person, and we'll teach you how to become the extraordinary person.
You coined the term zoxing. Let's talk about that for a bit. What is zoxing?
Well, zoxing, it's a unique term, and whenever basically what we did is we brought the mental photography, which is actually the brain management seminar, and we have a home study course in between this, and we brought that onto the internet. When we brought it onto the internet, we wanted to create something completely unique. When it came to the name, we wanted to have something that was simple and easy to remember, but we also wanted to create a word that we could then create other things from this. Now, this is very much thought through. So basically, what we have is Zox is our root word. Okay, whenever we Zox something, we're mentally photographing it. Then we have Zoxing, and we also have past tense, which is Zoxed. So we have the present tense, which is Zoxing, past tense, which is Zoxed. A person who Zoxes is a Zoxer. So we've created all these specialized words around. So we have our noun, our pronoun, our adjectives, our verbs, all basically roots of Zox. And that gives us an incredible ability to get our point across to people that this is actually as unique as it does sound.
Now, we have a couple minutes left before we go to break, and I wanted to spend this time for two reasons. I wanted you to give one last piece of advice to all the listeners out there about the importance of this, and then let's go into detail about ZoxPro.com and, of course, where people can learn about this and, of course, read all the amazing testimonials, like you said, from a bricklayer to a fireman to a student to a CEO. I've seen all these testimonials, and I've never seen someone who said they can't unlock these abilities. As a matter of fact, the reason why I chose you for today was because not only am I enrolled in the course, Edgar Mitchell went through this a little over 2 decades ago, and that's what I thought was so fascinating. Where can people find this information, and how can they go about going through this course that you essentially invented, the home course?
The ZoxPro training, the easiest place to find that on the internet is ZoxPro.com. That's spelled Z as in zebra, O, X as in X-ray, P-R-O, like as in professional. So it's ZoxPro.com. That's the easiest place to find it. And from there, we have other websites involved as well. We have a blog that has a whole heap of articles on it called mindtomind.com. But really, if you're just interested specifically in the in the information about ZoxPro to start with, that's the easiest place to find it, is on ZoxPro.com. Now, what was the other part of the question, please?
If you have one piece of advice or one final message to give out to the listeners out there about the importance, I mean, knowledge is power. And so obviously unlocking these abilities, if everyone on this earth did so, I think we could truly get to the next step. From your personal experience, what piece of advice would you give to everyone out there about Zoxing and about the ability to merge the subconscious and conscious?
If you care about your life, and if you care about how your life affects other people, then you need this. Plain and simple. You need this advantage to get you to your next step. Whatever those next steps are, this is the way to go.
Mr. Shannon Panzo, it has been an honor to have you on. Everybody out there, make sure you check out ZoxPro.com. Read through the testimonials. There's actually a free item there, actually, the Einstein's distraction method, which to me was a truly fascinating thing. So just by going to the website, you'll already have gained something and be above everybody else. Again, ZoxPro.com. You can see all the information. And now, when we come back from break, we are going to have a very different kind of interview. Everybody hears about the people who win, but not very many people hear about those who lost. In this case, we are speaking about POTUS, President of the United States of America. The person who didn't win was Michael Dukakis. 1988, he lost to George Herbert Walker Bush. That who is joining us in the second hour right after this break to speak about what he's been doing since, what he's doing now, as well as a message for all you listeners. On top of that, don't forget our contest. Everybody out there, we have several more tickets to give away to Contact in the Desert. Go to contactinthedesert.com/D, lowercase r, capital J. That's where you can enter to win. And so far, we've had a few winners. You've heard the one being announced at the top of this hour, the beginning of the show. And of course, you'll see more from now until May 15th. Again, contactinthedesert.com/Dr. J, capital D, lowercase r, capital J. Also, drjradiolive.com, drjradiolive.com. You'll see all the upcoming guests and all the interviews, including this one today, will be posted on YouTube. As a matter of fact, some of the most recent videos uploaded were, of course, Foster Gamble and Linda Moulton Howe, as well as John Lear, Congressman Merrill Cook, and Nick Pope should be uploaded very soon, and so many more. And that is under DRJ Radio Live. And with that being said, everybody stay tuned. Right as we return, we'll be right back with former presidential candidate and former governor of Massachusetts, Michael Dukakis. With that being said, this is Dr. J. Hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. We have an excellent hour 2 for you, and this has been a long time in the making. And truly, in my heart, I believe that if things had gone differently to about 27 years ago, we would honestly be living in a different world. With a popular vote of just under 52 million, this person could have led our nation and the world. And without further ado, let's bring on former presidential candidate as well as governor of Massachusetts, Michael Dukakis. Governor, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
It is an honest pleasure to have you. There are so many things going on in this world. I truly feel that if you won the presidency in 1988, things wouldn't have happened the way they did. I personally believe because every time there's a Republican in office, we end up more so in warfare than a Democrat. Before we get on to the current issues, what would you think you would have done differently in that term when we faced?
Well, I think you have to be fairly conservative in terms of what you think you can do. I mean, you've got 8 years. You hope. I mean, if you get yourself reelected, 4 at least. And you're not going to change the course of history, but I can assure you that we would have been working very hard to provide good and decent and affordable health care for all Americans, and especially working Americans and their families, starting in 1989. And that is something that I felt very strongly. I was able to do it in Massachusetts and in my own state. And although my successor at the time did everything he could to try to slow it down and stop it, certainly gave the kind of momentum that then produced what, in point of fact, was a very good health care plan for Massachusetts. I am, as you know, a big, big fan of public transportation and high-speed rail. I mean, I think they're both essential, and we need them all across the country. And a lot of time and attention would have been focused on that. And finally, on the foreign policy side, John, as you know, I'm not a big fan of U.S. intervention here, there, and everywhere all over the world. It isn't working. It hasn't worked. It keeps getting us into trouble. But I am a committed internationalist. I mean, you can't be the son of Greek immigrants and be an isolationist, right?
That's right.
I mean, we're brought up believing that we're part of a world, that we come from a very special part of the world, historically and otherwise. And but I'm a huge believer in building international institutions that set rules and enforce them in a way that makes it unnecessary for us to shoot each other, because we're part of a world in which you have a set of rules and they're enforceable. And so whether it's now or then, I mean, that would have been a very strong focus. And in this particular case, the guy that beat me, in fact, on the foreign policy side, although he was critical of some of the stuff that I was suggesting, turned out to be somebody who was a lot closer to me on the foreign policy side than his son, for obvious reasons. And I think, although I thought George H.W. Bush was kind of a lousy domestic president, I think his strength was foreign policy, because he understood that you can't get things done in this world unless you do so working closely with other nations and with the international community. Unfortunately, that was not a lesson that his son had learned. And a lot of the chaos in the Middle East today is the direct result of not understanding the lessons that Bush 1 taught us, and with a lot of support from a lot of people, actually made happen.
I definitely have to agree with you. Being the world police is not the right thing to do. But at the same time, as you mentioned, being a global superpower, especially with the fall of the Soviet Union, we had to, as you mentioned, have foreign policy into place and essentially not so much intervene in the countries, but help them, maybe mediate between two countries that had wars going on, but not necessarily send our arms in there and launch, bullets and bombs and start wars.
And, we have done that. I mean, take the Western Hemisphere, our own hemisphere, which was nothing but a series of wars and coup d'etat and military dictatorships and the rest of it. And unfortunately, we contributed to that with what I thought was a badly advised Cuban policy, which has been a badly advised policy for 50 years, and which, to the credit of the president, we're finally changing. But we now have, in the Western Hemisphere, John, an organization, as you know, called the Organization of American States. It has a charter. It's kind of baby UN for the Western Hemisphere. And thanks largely to that, we've had a remarkably peaceful hemisphere, if you think back. And I think with the change in American foreign policy when it comes to Cuba, it will be even more so. And I think the Organization of American States is exactly the kind of thing we need in regions all over the world, under the aegis of the United Nations, but with a lot of hard work done on the part of all of the countries of the region. And that's the kind of thing I strongly believe in. And if we can do that, whether it's in Europe, including, by the way, Russia, or in the Far East and in the Pacific, where we have a serious danger, I think, of getting ourselves into a silly kind of Cold War there, or in our own hemisphere or elsewhere. That's the kind of foreign policy that I believe in. It's the kind of foreign policy I think the United States should be committed to. But it's a very different kind of foreign policy from one where we're running around with our heads cut off, trying to put out a fire here and a fire there, and ending up with invariably a mess on our hands, which is what we're seeing now in the Middle East.
You're absolutely right. I think that that's where we were heading with the Cold War. And essentially, right after the Iraq invasion 2003, beginning 2004, 2005, there were rumors that this would be the next Vietnam. And essentially, that's what it became to be. If you were in power today, if you were sitting in Barack Obama's position, what would you do to handle things differently to prevent us creating more fires as we're trying to put them out? Because it's very volatile in that area right now.
It's volatile, and to a very great extent, it was triggered by the invasion of Iraq, which I thought was one of the dumbest things we've ever done, and which has had untold consequences. On the other hand, to be perfectly bipartisan about this, when the president said at one point, Assad has got to go, I said to myself, John, if you know anything about the history of the Middle East, and I'm a big fan of history, I think you've got to study history. You know, Greeks have an old saying, as you know, pathima mathema. It even rhymes. Things happen, you're supposed to learn from them, right?
That's right.
And I remember saying to Kitty at the time, if ever there was a candidate for non-intervention, it's Syria. If you know anything about the history of Syria, which, by the way, as you know, is a very rich history, one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, which will be wiped out by ISIS if they ever get a hold of them, and they're in the process of trying to do that now. We should have understood that 3 years ago. And whenever we thought of Assad, 3 million refugees and 250,000 dead people in Syria doesn't seem to me to be what the United States ought to be involved in. So a certain amount of restraint here, I think, is in order, even if we don't happen to like the particular government. And as you know, in point of fact, being a Democratic government is not a prerequisite for American support. Otherwise, we wouldn't be so close to Saudi Arabia, among other places, right?
That's right.
So I think the United States as a strong force for a world in which we have rules and we have ways to enforce them, but we also understand that this is going to happen overnight, and it will have to move at a pace which is consistent with what those particular countries desire, is the way to go. And a United States with that kind of attitude, I think, can do great good. And I'm very serious, John, when I say that I think we are on the threshold of what could be a world in which war is ruled out as a means for settling disputes between a number of countries. We've never been this close. And I want my country to be the country that leads that effort.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. We recently spoke to a lieutenant colonel who wrote a book that's circulating among the Department of Defense called Mind War, and it's essentially to end physical warfare. And he goes into detail about how many trillions of dollars we spent in bombing bullets and killing people, which doesn't really solve anything. Every time someone dies, that creates another enemy, because if someone's father, someone's child, someone's brother, someone's sister, regardless of who it is, you have angry family members and friends who end up turning to hate not just who killed them, but the country associated with them. And speaking of Syria, first of all, let me go back to what you said about history repeating itself. This is exactly why I think people needed to hear from you, and the same reason I bring anybody who has served in power and is essentially older than this generation, because you have lived it. You have seen it. And without your words telling the people right now, I think everything will be repeated, since we need to be looking at history. But back to Syria, a lot of people speculate that the reason Obama is asking for the funding is because this may end up leading into a war with Iran. Do you think that's possible?
Into a war with Iran?
Yes.
Well, here again, Iran today ought to be a friend and ally of the United States. Why isn't it? Because in 1953, the Eisenhower administration decided to overthrow the democratically elected government of Iran. And they did so. And what was the sin that triggered that? The fact that Iran wanted to own and operate its own oil industry rather than let Great Britain own and operate it. Now, you can understand why the country wanted control of its own oil industry. And yet, in the face of that, and under pressure from Winston Churchill, pressure which Harry Truman strongly resisted, the Eisenhower administration proceeded to use the CIA to overthrow the Iranian government and bring the Shah back. And everything that's happened since, and especially the attitude of some Iranians toward the United States, even though generally I think Iranians like the United States, has everything to do with that. Another example of American interventionism that has created a colossal mess. Now, the president, to his credit, and his Secretary of State, and I'll take a little bit of credit for training him because he was my lieutenant governor before he became United States Senator. But I think the president and John Kerry have been working very hard to try to come up with an agreement which will put serious restrictions on Iran's ability to develop military uses of nuclear energy, and at the same time eliminate what could be a serious ongoing problem in the Middle East. And I commend them for that. I'm sorry the Prime Minister of Israel doesn't agree with me, but remember, I mean, Israel has got the bomb.
That's right.
Never admitted it, but they have it. So here again, we find ourselves in a very difficult situation, which I hope the President and the Secretary of State, and frankly, the Congress, get us out of with a decent agreement here. But none of this would have happened if we hadn't decided that, I guess we preferred a dictator in the form of the Shah to a democratic government, which was certainly not threatening us, and whose only goal was to finally nationalize the oil industry and let the Iranians run their own oil industry, rather than a British imperial power, which is essentially what had been happening for years.
And it always sadly comes down to money. I'm going to ask you a quick question about interpretation, speaking of Eisenhower. As we all know, he was the supreme Allied leader during World War II, led the Normandy invasion, and became president. And obviously being a general, he was a very military-style president going in. But leaving office in 1961, he made this very famous speech to warn us of the military-industrial complex.
That's right.
How would you interpret that?
A very wise and experienced man giving us very wise and important advice as he left the presidency.
I definitely wholeheartedly agree. Now, going back to something we talked about earlier, something a little more lightheartedly, transportation. You see the transportation in Los Angeles and pretty much all of California, and for the nation for that matter, is really getting out of control. They can widen the 405 freeway, the 101, all they want, but it's never going to get better. But when you look at other states, cities that have subway systems, functioning public transportation, or countries in England, very few people even need cars in London and New York. don't you think, I know you advocated for this, but don't you think not only would we be better off, but it would save people money as well as headaches and not make people late for work?
Yes, and the people of Los Angeles agree with that, John, because remarkably, in the middle of a very severe recession, as you know, more than 2/3 of the voters in Los Angeles County voted to increase their taxes to pay for a modern rail-based transit system. That was really remarkable, you know. It really has happened. And now 5 different transit lines, some subway, some on the surface, are under construction in Los Angeles. And they're going to transform this city. Because once those lines are in place, people are going to be flocking into Los Angeles. They want to live here. They want to have the kind of rich cultural life that Los Angeles has now developed. They want to be close to the beach. They want to be reasonably close to the mountains. And you will see this city filling up with people and neighborhoods and activity, which is exactly what happens when you invest in rail-based transit, as only a guy from Boston knows, because my city was transformed by the kind of transit system that we were able to build and expand and rehabilitate. Now, at the same time, as anybody knows in California, you need something other than highways. You've just spent $1.2 billion on 10 miles of an HOV lane on the 405, right?
Yes.
And do you know what the results are?
None.
On average, cars are 4 minutes slower than they were before you built the thing.
So instead of solving the problem, it actually
just adds to it.
The problem.
Think if that money had gone into at least the beginning of a transit connection between Westwood and the Valley. What kind of impact would that have had on the 405? And far more. So I'm really very excited about this. You know, we've been out here for 20 years. I've taught at UCLA for 20 consecutive winter quarters. We love coming out here. We love this place. I love teaching these kids. And now, thanks to the people of Los Angeles, you're going to have yourselves a modern public transportation system. Now, what don't you have? You don't have an effective inner-city system. I spoke to the San Diego City Club. It's kind of the Commonwealth Forum of San Diego. I do that every year. A few weeks ago, Kitty and I left Los Angeles at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. 3 3/4 hours later, we arrived in San Diego. And this starting at 1 in the afternoon. A high-speed train between Los Angeles and San Diego would get you down there in 55 minutes. Think about it.
People will be truly relieved when they don't have to drive an hour and a half to get 15, 20 miles.
No question. I mean, we were going nuts trying to make it to our destination in San Diego. Now, of course, if you build a high-speed rail system, and I think it's an absolute priority for this state, then you got to make sure when you get to the station in San Diego there's a good public transportation system that connects directly with the railroad station and takes you to your destination. And if you go to Europe, that means if you come to Boston, that in fact is the case. I mean, you arrive at either North or South Station, and there's an excellent transit system which then takes you just about anywhere you want to go. There's no reason why California shouldn't have exactly that kind of system. But we're not going to get it if we're spending $300 billion on a supersonic bomber, whose purpose is a mystery to me, at least. That's the kind of investment we should be making in our country, in our economy, and in our people.
I'm glad you mentioned the inner city workings, because they absolutely have to be in place. Every stone needs to be left or turned, because if you have a rail that will take you to another city, yet there's no infrastructure in place to take you where you need to go within the city, what are you going to do? Rent a car and put you back in the same position as you were had you not taken the car to begin with? So you're absolutely right, and I wholeheartedly agree that we need to get to that level. But do you think it should be built the outside in or the inside out, meaning should we begin working within the cities to create local transportation and then go on to the statewide high-speed rail, or the other way around, connect all the major cities with this high-speed rail in California and then go into each city?
You got to do both, John. You got to do both. You've got to build the basic high-speed system that connects the northern and southern parts of the state. And that's finally underway. But at the same time, local communities, Los Angeles is doing this. San Francisco has done it. San Jose is doing it. Others ought to be doing this. Those local communities themselves, with some federal and state help, ought to be building those local transit systems so when you arrive at the San Francisco Transbay Terminal or at Union Station, now connected, and it soon will be, with the entire transit system, thanks to this downtown connector that's getting underway. That's what you really need. And there's no reason why we shouldn't have both. I mean, how do these other countries do it? You know, you go to Europe, you go to Japan, now you go to China. How do they do it? It's not rocket science. And I think the state of California has the capacity and the will to do this, and the sooner the better, frankly.
I agree. Better late than never is definitely the key.
You know, this city had the best streetcar system in America prior to World War II. You could go anywhere in those big red streetcars. But, you know, we were all going to drive, and we didn't have to worry about public transportation, and so the system deteriorated. Some of it was abandoned. Some of it was ripped up. And now it's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars to replace that. But, okay, that was a mistake made in the past. The question is, what are we doing looking ahead? And I'm very impressed with this. Antonio Villaraigosa deserves enormous praise for pushing this when a lot of people were skeptics. Mayor Garcetti is strongly supportive of it. And obviously, the vast majority of people in this city are for it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have voted to increase their taxes to pay for it. So my hat's off to Los Angeles and Southern California for all of this.
You're absolutely right. It is about time. The voters definitely want it. The people definitely need it. This city, and compared to other cities or states, for that matter, the state of California, we have more cars per capita per individual than essentially necessary. People love their cars, but at the same time, had we had this transportation system into place, people wouldn't need 3-4 cars or whatever many they have per household.
And they love good transit. Take a look at the Blue Line, which connects, as you know, Los Angeles with Long Beach. The Blue Line is the most successful light rail system in the country. Did you know that? The most successful light rail system in the country. Wait for the Expo line to be completed at the end of this year to connect downtown with Santa Monica. It's going to be hugely attractive. It's going to carry thousands of people. And more people are going to want to live along it and close to those stations so they can walk to the station and then get to work or get to wherever they're going. So let me tell you, it's going to be wonderful, and this city is going to be really transformed in the best kind of way. And so it's not just a question of this one or that one. The state, federal government ought to be working hard on an intercity high-speed rail system. Local communities should be working hard on their local public transportation system, so when you get to that train station, you can immediately walk across the platform and be there. By the way, I don't know whether you've been to Denver lately, but that's exactly what's happening in Denver, which looked a lot more like the old Los Angeles than anything else. They voted to raise their taxes. They're now investing that money in an excellent public transportation system, including a connector direct to the Denver airport. And the old Union Station, which when I first walked through it, when I went on the Amtrak board, was a real wreck, is an absolutely beautifully restored building where all of these transit lines will converge. That's exactly what you need and what you want.
And this will not only help our economy ease people's stress, but there will be a renaissance in the city by providing people, like you said, access to get there. And the historical downtown Los Angeles will once again be thriving as it was 50, even maybe 100 years ago, as you mentioned, pre-World War II when we had the streetcar system.
And coming alive already. I'm looking out my office window at UCLA, to the skyline of downtown Los Angeles. I mean, it's absolutely impressive. And by the way, I can see it. 15 years ago, I couldn't have seen it. It would have been covered with a blanket of brown smog, which also says something about what the city and the state are doing to deal with air pollution. So I'm very much an optimist about California and about Southern California, and especially the kinds of decisions that have been made recently, which are really going to turn this city and this region into very special places.
I definitely agree with that. I think not only will it be good for our economy, but as you mentioned, our ecology as well. The fact that we see the air we breathe is not something we should be proud about. I know that's a joke that everywhere people go, oh, I don't trust air I don't breathe. That's harmful for you. So when the day we can look out the window and see the city and not see a giant cloud of smog and know people are less stressed because they're able to get to work on time and not spend people, as you know this, they make their decisions of where to live and their jobs, where to work based on traffic. That's pretty sad. If you're offered a good position at a company, you shouldn't have to turn it down because you have to factor in the amount of traffic.
Yep.
Now, let's take this to segue back to the healthcare. I definitely believe that a government such as ours, the United States of America, who is supposed to lead the world as an example, fell behind, essentially. I remember when I visited the UK as well as France, their healthcare system in place for all their citizens is really top of the notch, as well as no one really has to care for it and to pay for it out of their own pocket. Now here, prior to Obamacare, my insurance rates, my health care, was extremely phenomenally high. But at the same time, post-Obamacare, my benefits went down, yet my rates didn't change at all. I currently see this as, or a lot of people see it as currently flawed, but I think over a couple years it will fix itself. What would you do to iron out the details that are holding us back?
Well, look, the bill that I signed in Massachusetts essentially was a state version of the Nixon plan, which was a very good plan, by the way, and which has been in operation in the state of Hawaii since 1975. People don't think about that. I mean, Hawaii has had this since 1975. Hawaii has some of the best health outcomes in the country, and it pays, for a very high-cost state, some of the lowest health costs in the country. There are a lot of reasons for that. But there's no question, first, that the Affordable Care Act has kept health costs under control, which were skyrocketing prior to that time. And secondly, it's responsible for ensuring millions and millions of working Americans and their families, John. These folks aren't sitting around. They're not loafing. They're not public assistance. They're not wealthy. You get Medi-Cal. These are working Americans and their families without a dime of health insurance. And, of course, when they get so sick that they can't stand up, they end up in the emergency room, and we're all paying for it and paying through the nose. We spend double per capita on health care than any of the other advanced industrialized nations in the world. They all have universal coverage, and we're still struggling to get there. That's thing in a nutshell. Now, let me just say this. If we don't took a poll tomorrow and said the American people, should working Americans and their families have decent, affordable health care, what do you think the numbers would look like?
Not very good.
Well, over 90% of the American people say working Americans and their families should have decent, affordable health care. I don't think my party's done a very good job of delivering that message, of helping people understand that this is about working folks and their families.
And that's exactly what I was going to make the point on. You mentioned it. You said the exact words, American working class families, the middle class. That is who's being truly affected. If you are in the poverty zone, yes, you get Medicare or Medi-Cal. But if you are doing making over six figures or fairly wealthy, you can afford great health insurance. As you mentioned, it is the people in the middle that, yes, that make up the majority of our population and yet have the lowest percentage of uninsured, at least prior to this enactment.
Not only that, it's a big boon to small businesses. Originally the fear was what? That this would hurt small businesses, they'd have to insure and so on. I had lunch today with a successful small businessman here in Los Angeles who employs about 50 people. He is saving, he told me, about $7,000 a month in health insurance premiums thanks to the Affordable Care Act. And he's not alone. So there are tremendous benefits here. And again, I think those of us who are strong supporters of the President's plan have not done a very good job of helping people to understand just how important it is and who is benefiting from it. Because they're precisely the folks that you're talking about. Middle income, low, moderate, working folks who obviously can't pay out of their pocket for 100% of what the insurance companies are charging. And I think, assuming the Supreme Court keeps its hands off this thing, and that's a big assumption, unfortunately, as you know, there's no reason why we shouldn't have virtually every American insured with decent, affordable health care.
Exactly, and it's pretty sad when a country has the people living in poverty essentially getting better health care than the people that are working class and contributing to the economy.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, it's not that we want poor people not to be provided with decent health care, but what about working folks? Average, middle-income working folks. I mean, what about them? What about the self-employed? What about this small business guy who employs 40 or 50 people and today is saving money while his employees are being provided good and decent health care? I mean, that's the message, it seems to me, that we've got to get out there. And in the meantime, I certainly hope that the Supreme Court will not gut the bill. There is absolutely no legal basis for this suit. I'm surprised they even took the case. And I hope and expect that the Affordable Care Act will be intact and moving ahead once that decision is over.
If they tried to end it right now, I think it'd be more catastrophic because you have so many people that have signed up now under the Affordable Health Care Act.
Millions.
What would you do? Just to cut them off?
It's a very good question. You've got a Congress that doesn't seem to be interested and has voted how many times to repeal the Affordable Care Act and has no clue as to what they would do as a substitute. None whatsoever, except to send people back to the emergency room. The most expensive and the most inefficient way to provide regular ongoing health care. Speaking
of this healthcare still at this moment, one thing that worries me is ever since it's been enacted, a poll not too long ago stated that a lot of the doctors would rather stop practicing or leave the country under this plan. And I know the personal impact I've seen is some doctors that used to take my insurance no longer take any insurance. And I walk into other doctors' offices and I've seen signs that says we do not take Obamacare. This transition is a very scary one. What can we do as citizens, and what can our government do to iron everything out?
This has nothing to do with Obamacare, John. This has everything to do with the most complicated, expensive, incomprehensible health insurance system in the world. 25 cents of every premium dollar these days goes for administrative overhead. Can you believe this? And ask doctors what it's like to try to work through this system. I can't speak for California, but I can tell you that in Boston, for example, the teaching hospital, which is the teaching hospital for Tufts Medical School, one of our great medical schools in the Boston area, and by the way, the place where our primary doctor out here in California got his medical degree, is the teaching hospital is a medium-sized hospital. It's the Tufts New England Medical Center with about 400 beds. John, how many people do you think they have on staff doing nothing but wrestling with and fighting with insurance companies? What do you think?
A ridiculously high number, I would presume.
500 salaried employees. All they do all day long is try to deal with this. I don't know of a doctor that doesn't have 2 or 3 people on staff doing nothing but arguing with insurance companies. Now, there's an answer to this. Simplify the system. Simplify the system. And we can do that. But state legislatures have to act on this. So, by the way, the Affordable Care Act does, in fact, have some provisions in it designed to help the states do that. But there's no reason why we have 15 or 20 or 25 different kinds of health insurance. It's ridiculous. 3 basic policies, take your pick, same definitions, same billing codes, all that kind of stuff. We could save absolutely billions by doing that, and at the same time, it makes it possible for our doctors to practice medicine instead of having to wrestle with insurance companies every day.
By having it so difficult, you're absolutely right. It's not only creating chaos, but it's scaring people. It's scaring doctors. And as you mentioned, you're absolutely right. People in doctor's office, their full-time job that I've seen is, you're right.
That's all they do. That's all they do all day long is argue with, negotiate with, debate with insurance companies. And I'm not blaming the insurance companies. What we ought to have is insurance regulators in this country. You've got an insurance commissioner. We have an insurance commissioner who have the authority to dramatically simplify the system, make it easier for people to get access, make it much easier for doctors to practice medicine instead of putting up with this stuff, and will save us absolutely billions of dollars. And the faster we can do that, the better, in my opinion.
I agree, and that actually brings the next topic, because saving billions of dollars is vital to our economy. We need to get to the point of saving trillions to end this deficit. But let's talk about the geopolitical world, or the geopolitical or geoeconomic situation right now, specifically our heritage, our country, or Greece, which is drastically changing right now. They've put on the table where they want Plan A to eliminate 50% of the debt to Germany, but they say there's no Plan B. What do you think, again, just as opinion, what do you think could happen and will happen?
Well, first, the Greeks have to do certain things, and you know that, and I know that. They've got to clean up corruption. They've got to go out and collect taxes owed, especially by the wealthy, who are notorious evaders. They've got to eliminate a lot of the feather bedding that goes on in the system. And I think the new government is committed to doing that. They've even appointed a minister of corruption, as you know, who's one of the best people in the business in Greece, one of the best corruption fighters there is, as a new minister in the cabinet. But austerity never got any country out of a recession. I mean, that's just a historic fact. And to impose this kind of mindless austerity on the Greeks and the Greek economy not only makes no sense to me, they will never get out of this hole if that's what you insist that they do. And so the new government is not saying we won't pay. The new government is saying we've got to stretch out this debt burden. We've got to, we can't do it overnight. We can't do it just with a click of the fingers. And they're right. They're right. No matter how that debt accumulated, you cannot turn an economy around with those kinds of policies. We tried it once in 1929, right?
Yes.
When Herbert Hoover was the president. Pathima mathima, you do it once, you ought to learn from that experience. And yet, frankly, the Republicans in Congress wanted that policy, which, fortunately, Obama and the Democratic Congress at the time refused to adopt. If we had done what they wanted us to do, John, we would be looking like Europe these days. We'd be looking like Europe these days. So enough of the austerity stuff. Insist that Greece govern itself well and honestly and efficiently. But for heaven's sakes, give them a little bit of breathing room, and that's really all the new government is asking, so that they can deal with these terrible problems of poverty and at the same time get their economy back on track.
There's a few points I want to make, and you've hit all of the major ones. First of all, the corruption is out of control in Greece. The unemployment is so high, 25% around the country, 50% among the youth, and then the debt itself, 175% of the GDP. As we talked about off-air prior to today, we mentioned that what would a situation do with if someone owed money to their creditors? What would they do on that micro level? Well, you'd work it out. You wouldn't just say take it or leave it.
You'd go to the bank and you'd say, look, I'm hurting. Can we stretch it out? Can we just pay interest for some period of time? Are there ways that we can adjust this? And the vast majority of banks will do that. Now, if that's the case in the banking business, why can't the EU do that? Not only for Greece's sake, but for its own sake, because as you know, Southern Europe has similar unemployment rates, and they're having problems, and they're being told that they've got to practice austerity. It's just a totally self-defeating philosophy. It will never work. It hasn't worked. It's not going to work.
To have such a situation in place where essentially the European banks don't want to work with a struggling country, there's no positive interest on any side. First of all, the Greeks won't benefit from it, all of Europe won't benefit, and the banks won't benefit from it if they're not going to get any of their money back. It behooves them to work with Greece and all the other struggling countries.
No question.
Some rumors are circulating that if Greece leaves the EU, which a lot of people argue it was a big mistake to have joined the European Union in the first place, that they may join the BRICS nations, meaning Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Do you think that's a possibility?
I hope not. I mean, why would you want to join another block of nations, two of whom at least are in big trouble, and others may be? I mean, the Russian economy is in tatters. Brazil is struggling these days. I mean, why would it benefit Greece to join that? Look, Greece's place is in Europe. Always has been. And there's no reason under the sun why it can't continue to be a very important part of the European Union. What the EU has got to do is start using its head, understanding that there's no way this debt can be paid off in the short run, and do what responsible and thoughtful bankers do, which is to work with Greece to work out a payment plan and a schedule that it can handle. Remember, Greece is not saying, as you know, John, that we will not pay anything on our debt. They're just saying, look, we can't pay what you folks are demanding. We'll pay somewhat less and we'll stretch it out longer. Why isn't that a perfectly reasonable solution?
It's a very reasonable solution, which is why it boggles my mind that the European Union or banks or the German banks don't want to work with them. And that's what scares me. It makes no sense
But
whatsoever.
the Central European Bank finally is beginning to act. And remember, Ben Bernanke, as chairman of the Federal Reserve, played a hugely important role in our recovery. And he calls himself a Republican. But there are a lot of Republicans in the Congress who are very angry with him. I think the Fed is out of control, that they never should have done this. Well, where would the United States be today if it hadn't been for Bernanke and the Federal Reserve, back when we were in the depths? Of course it made sense. And there's no reason why the European Central Bank shouldn't do exactly the same thing.
I, again, wholeheartedly agree with what you said. And now I'm going to shift this to our domestic issue in the sense that our gold standard, the fact that Nixon left the gold standard in the 70s, and of course we've seen inflation at a very high rate and other countries, some demanding their gold back. What do you think of leaving the gold standard? I know this is over a 40-plus-year-old question, but do you think that was a good decision on Nixon's part?
Sure, because if you stick with the gold standard, it makes it very difficult for you to stay flexible when it comes to dealing with economic problems. I mean, there's no magic in gold. What's important is that we learn lessons from the past. We understand that when times are tough, we stimulate the economy. When times are good, we slow it down. We know how to do that, and we use the tools that we have in our toolbox, which this president and the Congress, at least in 2009, 2010, did, which is one of the reasons why we're coming back so strong. Now, of course, the closer we get to full employment, the better the jobs are going to be, the better the wages are going to be. That's already happening. We saw that in the case of the Walmart decision on what their minimum wage would be. I mean, that wasn't done just out of the goodness of their heart. It was done because the economy is getting better and stronger, the labor market is tightening, and people are no longer going to work for Walmart for $8.25 an hour.
One startling figure that I heard was that the CEOs of Walmart, or the CEO, by the time he goes to lunch, makes more money than a general employee at Walmart makes throughout the entire year. The gap between working citizens and their respective CEOs is very, very high, far different than what it used to be in the 70s and 80s and prior decades to that. Do you think it's getting out of control, as I do? And what can we do as citizens, and what can the government do to put a stop to this drastic difference between wages within the same companies?
Well, the first thing you do on the low end is raise the minimum wage. A number of states, by the way, I think close to 30 have already done so. We ought to have an increase in the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage. You know, if the minimum wage today, John, had simply kept pace with inflation with the minimum wage in 1969, the minimum wage today would be $11 and some odd cents in the United States, just to keep the 69 minimum wage paying and purchasing the same thing. I think the earned income tax credit can be extremely helpful. There's nothing like full employment, I can tell you, to drive wages up, and I hope and expect that we will see that as well. Now, what do you do with these monstrous, enormous salaries? Subject them to a pretty significant tax. And if you do, then we can take some of that at least and begin investing it in the country's economy, in the country's future. So I don't think there's any kind of mystery to this. We know what we should be doing. The issue is, will we do it?
That's the key, and I really hope we do get to that, because decades ago, following World War II and before that, anybody can have essentially any job and support a family. You could be the milkman, or you can be a clerk at a store. Now, you can come right out of college or graduate school and get a decent job with a salary of, say, $60,000 a year or so, but yet you still can't afford to live yourself paying student loans, let alone support a family. What happened? How did we get here?
Well, lots of reasons for it. There have been interesting changes in society. Corporate boards and CEOs seem to think that they're entitled to 300 or 400 or 500 times the average salary in their companies. Do you remember Plato's mean when it came to salaries? He said the highest paid employees should not be making more than 4 times the lowest paid employee. That was Plato in ancient Greece. What is it now? 400 times, 500 times, 600 times. Now, I don't think we need wage or salary control over corporate salaries. I mean, what we need are tax policies that will expect the wealthy to give significantly more back on a percentage basis than somebody making a modest wage. And I think most people agree with that.
And this, having such a drastic difference, is why there is hatred among employees for their respective employers. Or, as you mentioned, as Plato, he thousands of years ago made a very fascinating remark. 4 to 1 is a very viable ratio, because not only do you have the respect of the employees, you're not separating classes, essentially,
right.
And therefore you're not saying I'm above you and therefore I deserve to come here in my limousine and have all this money, yep, while you can work and get nothing, essentially.
And we happen to have a Greek American in Massachusetts who runs a very large and successful supermarket chain, which was the subject of a family feud as to who would own it and who would get the profits from it. But Arthur Demoulas has done an incredible job, and his employees essentially said, we won't work unless this guy is our CEO. Now, why do they love him so much? Because he pays a decent wage? Because he encourages people to stay and go up the promotional ladder? Because he has profit sharing, John? Profit sharing. Because he provides good benefits, and when push came to shove, those employees proved to be incredibly loyal to him. And it's one of the reasons he's now the CEO.
And profit sharing, I think, is a very viable option to give employees incentive, as well as the productivity among them would skyrocket.
Yep.
Now, I'm going to come full circle because we're nearing the end of the hour, and going back to our famous saying, Pathima Mathima, and again, of history repeating itself. Had you been elected in 1988, sworn in 1989, you would have been right in the midst of the collapse of the Soviet Union, which some people argue was needed to keep the United States in check. There was a check and balance, essentially. We wouldn't go to war with certain countries because we knew that we would have to face them. But when they left, it left the United States to be in a position to become the world police. And as we argued earlier, the intervention that we've had and implemented is done nothing but harm. And it's created a lot of hatred among other countries and their citizens to us. I remember walking around the streets of Switzerland and they hated me because I was American. Of course, when they got to know me as a personal level, then they said, okay, we just don't like your president. And do you think that we need to be checked by another country, or will we essentially learn? I know this is pure speculation, but people would love to hear.
Well, I think Bush 1 had it right when he said we need a new world order. What was he talking about? He was talking about a world in which the international community, working together, sets some rules for the conduct of nations. The United States and Russia and China, as well as others, with the kind of institution, either through the United Nations or these regional organizations that we now have, that could make sure that these issues were settled peacefully and effectively. That's what he meant, and I agree with him. I agree with him. It's one of the reasons why I thought on the foreign policy side he was such a good president. And that's the only way we're going to create the kind of world that you and I and our kids and grandkids and their kids can have, and in which they can live peacefully and constructively and live good lives. That's where the United States ought to be exercising its leadership.
It is exactly everything that you said is why I wanted to speak to you so long and bring your message to the airwaves. I truly wish you were sitting in the White House right now. Is there a possibility we can get you there?
No.
Again, would you run again?
There are good people out there, and I had my shot, and unfortunately I didn't make it. But that doesn't mean that one can't try to play a constructive role in all of this, and I've tried to do that since I left the governor's office. First, by teaching young people, both on the East Coast and the West Coast, and I love teaching. I love working with these young people. We're producing some great young people in this country, and they're going to be great public servants, and I think one of the things that guys like me should be doing is doing the best we can to help encourage them, inspire them, and train them. And secondly, to stay deeply and actively involved in national affairs, world affairs, and to do whatever I can do and others like me to make this a better world. And, God, I'm 81 years of age. I feel about 21. I'm married to the most attractive Medicare recipient in America, and she's 78. We're blessed with great kids and grandkids, and we're going to continue to do everything we can to try to make this a better world, and to get great satisfaction and fulfillment, John, from doing that. I mean, we've been lucky. It's been a gift to be able to be deeply and actively involved in public life, and I really feel that very strongly, and so does Kitty. So we're going to continue to do that, continue to try to encourage younger folks to follow in that path, and I can't think of anything better that one can do, and we're going to continue to do it, both.
Well said, everybody, by, of course, Michael Dukakis, who ran against George W. or H.W. Bush in 1988. Would the world have been different? Well, I guess we could only speculate. But the reason why I played this tonight is because you will get to hear him live again in a couple short weeks. So now that we are here on Late Night in the Midlands, I'm going to do two things. Over the next couple months, you're going to hear our new shows, top guests, and of course we take guest requests very seriously. And I do want to give great shout outs to Ira Robinson, who of course is doing a lot of work behind the scenes, not just for LNM, but of course putting our show on that station. And of course Mike Vara, who's been working years on this as well. On top of that, like I said, we will have new shows for you, and moreover, we will also be having classic, the newer classic ones that are top guests that everybody loves to hear. So we will be playing them and giving them to you. Now, the way it's going to be working is this is going to be playing on our YouTube stream. Right after that, straight to Late Night in the Midlands. That is right. Of course, I'd like to thank the Dr. J Radio Live team, Johnny Webb, all the way in the United Kingdom, who has been on staying awake very late to do this, and even later as we play in Late Night in the Midlands, depending on the night, either midnight Eastern or 1 a.m. Eastern. Usually a 2-hour show, sometimes a 1-hour show, but you'll get notice. All you have to do is go to drjradiolive.com. That is drjradiolive.com. Remember, Uri Geller last night? Tomorrow night, there is another person who's going to do another live experiment. I really want both of your both of them, your feedback, so I can deliver it to them both respectively. They are eagerly awaiting for you. Even Deep Program Network in the United Kingdom. Anybody listening to this show, go to drjradiolive.com, hit the contact button, and there you go. Remember, that's the only name you have to remember is the name of the show. Dr. J Radio Live, DRJ Radio Live. That is the same name for our website, drjradiolive.com. All of our social media accounts, and I mean all. Most importantly, our YouTube channel where we archive our shows. Now, sadly, we've only archived about 20%. We are working feverishly to get them all up there, but they will be, I would say, by the end of this year. If there's one that you haven't seen posted that you want, just reach out to me and I will get you the MP3. In the meantime, you could use Twitter to send questions, Instagram, Flickr, Tumblr, Facebook, Pinterest, so many things, Google+, even Gmail. I even have a Gmail account there. So everything is under DRJ Radio Live. Now, before we go, I'm going to let you guys hear some favorite fans, and then we'll go, and then you guys, Late Night in the Midlands, it is truly late night for you.
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
I'm Tony Gosling, investigative journalist from Bristol, England, former BBC journalist on BBC Radio, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
I'm Jack Osborne, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio.
My name is Mike Gravel, former senator from Alaska. You're listening to Dr. J Radio.
Hi, everyone. I'm Uri Geller, and guess what? You're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
I'm Darlene Hooley, former Congresswoman, and you are listening to Dr. J Radio Live.